Okay, everybody, members of the press and friends of God and so on, thanks very much for coming. We're really pleased to have you here, and if you've taken time out of your busy schedules and so on, we're especially pleased to have C-SPAN here to cover this luncheon, which I think is, most people don't know it yet, but it's going to rival the commotion that's going on Capitol Hill right now, and I think you'll realize that when you leave. It's about something that is pretty disturbing. It's something that we've been working on a long time, and again, for the people that I did meet when I came in, and for the nationwide audience, my name is Bill Murphy. I'm chairman of the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, and we've been working in 3 years on something that we got into really by accident. I have a financial website, LaMetropoleCafe.com, and I started to write about the gold site, and I've had a big background in markets and so on, and for me right away I realized in a couple of weeks after the long-term capital management fiasco that something was very wrong. Just as a market trader, it just right away I said the gold market is not acting right, and it'd be like a heart doctor that's listened to 1,000 tickers, and he's listened to another ticker, and he says, you know, there's something wrong here, and it was the same thing. So I began to write about it, and one of my subscribers to the site, Chris Powell, the managing editor, another member of the press of the Journal Enquirer in Manchester, said, Bill, why don't you stop talking about it? Let's do something about it. It's obvious something's wrong here. So we formed the Gold Antitrust Action Committee. Somehow I got on CNBC almost 3 years ago to the day, and that was the last time the American public ever saw Bill Murphy or read about me in the general, on the big press, after they heard what I had to say. So we're here today to try to change that with the people who are here and through the good graces of C-SPAN and so on. We have a lot to cover. It's a huge subject. It's mammoth. It dwarfs Enron in the sense that it's got a twinge of Watergate to it. And when the story comes out, unfortunately, there's going to be ramifications around the world, which you're going to hear about today. But first, it's my pleasure to introduce a very special lady that I got to meet through the internet. We've become good friends. She's very unique on the American scene. Her name is Catherine Austin Fitts. She was a very successful partner at Dillon Read until 1989. Then she joined the Bush administration to help clean up the savings and loan scandal and the HUD mess. When she decided to leave that position, she was asked to be on the Federal Board of Governors, which she declined. And she did so to start her own company, Hamilton Securities. In 1990, she helped clean up the BCCI mess and more HUD mess. And now, somehow we were fortunate to get her to help us clean up this gold mess. And I think it's fair to say, you know, when people are stealing billions of dollars, who are you going to call? Catherine Austin Fitts.
My cousin Jane, I live in Hickory Valley, Tennessee. My cousin Jane, I live next door to her. She's a teacher, so I'm putting this up here. So what that means is when I ask you a question, you have to try and answer. Okay, because I'm the teacher. We all know how that works. Okay. I want to thank the Gold Antitrust Action Committee for being here today and to having me here. About a year and a half ago, I joined a cafe on cyberspace called La Metropole Cafe. Who here is a member of La Metropole Cafe? Oh, great. Okay, well then, you know, I guess we know each other. We just haven't met. And it was wonderful. When I was on Wall Street and you were having a bad day, a really bad hair day, we used to go to the 21 Club. You'd say, you know, we'd give up on the markets today, we'd go over to the 21 Club, and you'd hang out sort of in the corner in the back in the dark with a bunch of money guys who would talk about the real deal. And that's what La Metropole Cafe is. To me, you know, it's my 21 Club of the new millennium, except now I do it on the internet. And now I get to talk to people all over the world. There's people from New Zealand, there's people from Europe. It's incredible. Anyway, but the patron, the host of the cafe is Mr. Murphy. And for those of you who don't know him, the La Metropole Cafe members, but for those of you who don't know him, let me describe to you Bill Murphy with sort of 2 sentences. Wayne Gretzky is one of my favorite hockey players. Wayne Gretzky, when asked once why he was such a great hockey player, said, "I skate to where the puck will be." And I have a habit of doing that, but Mr. Murphy really has a habit of doing that. Mr. Murphy is skating to where the puck will be, and it's always good to listen to the guy who's skating there. The second thing is the cafe is divided into the little different tables that you go to at the cafe. There's the Hemingway table, there's the Kiki. What are some of the other tables?
Dos Passos.
Dos Passos.
Man Ray. Kiki.
Right. But my favorite table is the Little Bear table. And the Little Bear table is named after, come on, La Metropole. Who's from La Metropole? Who's it? His dog. The day that Bill's dog died, we had to stop, we had to look at the picture, we had to read a poem about his dog. We couldn't talk about gold for 24 hours. If we'd been long gold, we would have been killed that day. Anyway, so, but the cafe, for those of you who don't join and you really want to hear about the real deal in the financial markets today, worldwide, go to La Metropole Cafe. How important is the gold story? Okay, because if you're busy, like I am, the most precious thing you have is your time. So if I'm a journalist, and I'm not a journalist, but if I was a journalist, I'd want to know, well, how important is this story? So I thought I'd bring you something from Hickory Valley. We use this a lot in Hickory Valley. Does everybody know what this is? Okay. Okay, now you know what this is. That's the bullseye, okay? If this was a target practice of the financial system and the integrity of the financial system, the gold story, the Gaddis story, what Bill is trying to say is right at the heart of the matter. Does anybody from La Metropole Cafe disagree with me on that one? Oh, Bill will throw you off if you disagree. Okay, let me tell you why. I grew up in West Philadelphia. I was born in 1950, and in 1950 in West Philadelphia, the Dow Jones was, what was the Dow Jones in 1950? I know you know, Martin, come on. 300. Around 300, okay. How much was debt per person in the United States? Anybody know? All consumer government debt. Today it's over $100,000 per person. It was very low, right? It's fair to say it's very low. What was the price of gold? $32.
35 was the fixed price of the IMF.
Okay, 36 fixed with the IMF. What was the Solari Index? No one knows, because no one knows what the Solari Index is. Let me describe the Solari Index to you. The Solari Index, my company's name is Solari. The Solari Index is the percent of people in a neighborhood who believe a child can leave their home, go to the nearest place to buy a popsicle, and come home alone safely. Okay? So it's the percent of people in a neighborhood who believe their child is safe and is safe to run around and do whatever they want. When I was a child and the Dow was at 300, the Solari Index was 100%. It was unthinkable that a child wasn't safe to run around. Today in West Philadelphia, what's the Solari Index? Zero. Okay? So the Dow has gone from 300 to what, about 9,800? So it's gone up about 20 times. The Solari Index has gone down into the bottom, and our debt's gone way up. Okay, that's where we are. Now, that's what I was thinking until I met Bill Murphy, but let me tell you why the gold story is important. The Dow's at 9,800. Is that real? What's the meaning of Enron? How much did Enron report in its earnings the year before it went bust? Does anybody know? Turns out it wasn't real. How much of their earnings wasn't real? About 100% of their earnings weren't real. Okay? So if the Dow's trading at what, about, say, 30, 33 times? How much of that is real? In November, Walter Cadet, a former economist with J.P. Morgan, done a wonderful study for for Levy Institute, presented it in London for Sanders Research. His study shows that anywhere from 20 to 30% is from overstated accounting profits. It's a wonderful study. I would recommend it to you. He was giving his paper first. I gave my paper on how the money works in organized crime and how that intersects with corporate profits and government policy. And what Walter and I didn't understand was that my piece of overstated corporate earnings and his piece of overstated corporate earnings, when combined, implied that there was potential for an incredible mark-to-market the day that the financial press and the market started to understand that transparency was not something that we had or could depend on. Okay, so the Dow's at 9,800, but what we know is that's based on non-transparent, probably puffed up earnings, if Enron is just the tip of the iceberg, and I believe it is. Okay, now let's look at the price of gold. What's the price of gold today?
300 roughly.
Oh, it's up. When I left to drive from Hickory Valley, it was sinking into 298. Okay, the price of gold, is it real? Okay, because we know the Dow may not be real. Well, why is it important what the price of gold is? Let me tell you the way I describe it to folks in Hickory Valley. You're a very busy person. You don't have time to run around your house every 5 seconds to make sure that a thief is not sneaking in, right? You don't have time. So what do you have? You have a security alarm, right? Or you have a smoke alarm. You have alarms on your house so that you can focus on what you're doing in the den or the basement, and you don't have to be running around the house making sure somebody's not coming in the window and stealing your money and stealing your TV and stealing your food, right? Okay? You're thinking the security alarm works. Now, the reason I say that gold is at the heart of the matter is if gold was free to trade in an open market, it's fair to say that if something was wrong, we would know. Why would we know? The price of gold would go up. Now, what would happen if the price of gold was manipulated down? Our security alarm wouldn't work, except we wouldn't know it wasn't working. We would think we were safe. And so we could be lulled into sleep while this enormous bubble was going on, right? Okay. Now, let me tell you a story. In the summer of 2000, I went to see a staff member who is the staff member for then the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee for HUD, Housing and Urban Development. I'd been Assistant Secretary of HUD in the first Bush administration. And the staff person said to me, "What do you think is going on at HUD?" And I was trying to be demure. This was somebody I'd never met before. And I said, "Well, I don't know. What do you think's going on?" And the staff person looked at me and said, "HUD is being run as a criminal enterprise." Now let's remember who this person works for. This person works for the person who's in control of the appropriations. That's the money, right? Now, what did I think? I knew she was right because I'd worked at HUD. I'd cleaned up the Iran-Contra mess from 1989 to 90. I'd gone back in with my company as financial advisor and cleaned up a lot more fraud. And then I'd sort of been run out of town on a rail in 1997, and shortly after I left, what happened? General Accounting Office to date has reported that over $3 trillion is missing from the federal books. I mean, you think Enron's cooked. Wait do you see what happens when you cook books with the federal credit. Over $3 trillion is missing, and a chunk of that change is missing from HUD. So the stealing got more aggressive after we got run out of town. Now, how can that be? The reason I fought for many years facing the fact that HUD was a criminal enterprise was I knew, because HUD's just a giant financial institution, it's got a portfolio of $500 billion of mortgage insurance, another $500 billion of securities that securitize that mortgage insurance. How did I know, or why? The problem is the minute you say HUD is a criminal enterprise, what you know is that cannot be true unless the Department of the Treasury, the Department of Justice, and the New York Federal Reserve, the depository for the U.S. Treasury, is colluding for HUD to be a criminal enterprise. And that one, frankly, was pretty hard for me to swallow. And I think if Bill has trouble persuading anybody about what's going on in the gold market, it's to understand if what he is saying is true, you've got to go there, just like I had to go there when I faced what was happening at HUD. Now, what happened after the senior staffer for the chairman of the House, of the Appropriations Committee for HUD told me that HUD was being run as a criminal enterprise? What happened next in the Appropriations Committee? I'm sure somebody here can guess. What happened next?
They gave HUD a whole bunch of more taxpayer money.
Exactly. My congressman is Ed Bryant from Memphis. Everybody in Hickory Valley used to love Ed until I started talking. And my senator is Fred Thompson, who oversees, until the Senate switched the government affairs, and says, "Oh, it's terrible, nobody can do the accounts, we're paying contractors hundreds of millions of dollars, but nobody can do the accounts because, bureaucrats are stupid." And, I say Fred is one of the best cover-up artists that ever lived in the U.S. Senate. And he's got everybody in America saying $3 trillion is missing because people are incompetent. I mean, any money guy knows that's hard to swallow. But what did Fred and Ed and Bill Frist, my other senator, what did they do? After I went and talked to their staffs and said, HUD's a criminal enterprise, we got to do something. What did they do? They gave HUD a raise, $1.7 billion. Well, why would why would one congressman and 2 senators give a criminal enterprise a raise? Why would they do that? They do that to make the boss happy, right? What do you do at work? You make the boss happy. So I think it's come down, we need to ask, and this goes to the title of the luncheon today, who are we working for? Are we working for the banks? Or are we working for the people? I can tell you who Ed, Fred, and Bill are working for from Hickory Valley. Okay, now, if you're a journalist, should you cover the gold story? And I would say yes, you should cover the gold story, and you should do it for 3 reasons. One, it's important. We have a financial system. The security alarm may not be working. We need to get it turned back on. That's number 1. Number 2, this story is easy to get. It's very hard to get this story, is the gold market being manipulated? Because then you got to learn all about these things called derivatives and forget, that's hopeless. Under all the laws of the United States related to government money or private money, if you read again and again and again, I don't care if it's the SEC, criminal law, anything, what it says is you are required when you play with other people's money to make things transparent. What does transparent mean? It means easy to understand what's going on. Que pasa? You should be able to pick up the annual report of a company, and you should be able to understand what they're doing with your money. You should be able to pick up the federal budget, and you should be able to understand what's going on. Now, I was the Assistant Secretary of Housing, okay? And there are people who tell you the problem is I'm too smart. I picked up the HUD financial statements for the year 2000. I spent 15 hours trying to understand them. I couldn't understand. That's not transparent, okay? We, as whether it's people in the marketplace or members of the press, you are entitled under the law to transparency. Here's how the story is really easy to get. Just requires Secretary O'Neill and Bill McDonough to be very transparent about what they're doing with gold. Where's the gold? What's the Exchange Stabilization Fund? What is it doing? Is it intervening in the markets? What money is it using? This is really simple. Just hold them accountable to explain to you in a way that the people in Hickory Valley can understand what in the world's going on in the gold market and why these nuts and gold bugs over at La Metropole are making such a noise. That's easy. The third reason why you should do this story is so hot. And let me just tell you one reason why I know it's hot. I spend a lot of time driving around America, and I spend a lot of time talking about truckers, because away from La Metropole Cafe, if you want to understand what's going on in the real deal, you talk to truckers, because they drive around and they see everything going back and forth, and they hear a lot, they share a lot, they know a lot about what's going on. About 6 months ago, I was standing in line to pay for my gas at a truck stop. I had a trucker in front of me who had a major transaction for about 10 trucks, and I had another guy behind me, so I was just standing there, and I reached for a tabloid that had on the head, I never read tabloids, but this one on the front of it said, "All the gold is gone from Fort Knox." So I thought, well, I wonder what the tabloids are saying. So now it compares to what Murphy's saying. So I pull out the tabloid, and the trucker behind me says, "Oh, lady, don't waste your money on that. That's crap. Don't read that." So I flip open to the gold story. He says, "Well, that's not crap." he says the gold is all gone. The trucker in front of me, who's in the middle of this very complicated transaction, turns around and he says, "Yep, the big boys got together and they done stole all the money." And then all the truckers behind me started agreeing and talking about how they stole the money and the gold's gone. Now, this is amazing, because you don't read that in the Wall Street Journal. You don't read that in the New York Times. That's a story, because there's a lot of people out there who want to know, where's all the gold in the world? How's it work? What are these guys screaming about? It's a hot topic. So with that, let me turn it back to Bill. He has some materials. Let me thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. I love, we're going to stay and take questions and answers afterwards, more. But I would encourage you to get these materials, to read them. And I would definitely encourage you to be part of the conversation, because the most important thing, I think, is not what's going on, but how do we fix it? And I'll tell you one thing, if you want to run a financial system or a financial institution with integrity, the first thing you got to do is you got to find the other excellent people who have integrity and put them in charge. And so I would really encourage you to come to Le Metropole Cafe, because there are many, 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 many very high quality, excellent people who are not only trying to understand, how the gold market's working and make money off of it, as they should, but trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we fix it? So I would encourage you, join Le Metropole. Bill?
Oh, thanks so much, Catherine. That was terrific. I think you all know now why that we're all so fond of her. What we're going to do here, while you're enjoying the meal, is that I'm going to take you through some things, sort of a chronology of what this is all about, to try to get some of the people here that aren't familiar with this, and the members of the press here that were good enough to come, to try to give them some way to grasp the magnitude of this thing. And you have a lot of materials, and I'm going to cover that at the end. And then we'll have Chris Powell, my colleague, speak, and then we're going to open it up to questions here that you may have, and to so that we can have some fun and go into that. As I said, after the CNBC experience, we decided we'd try to do whatever we could to get the word out there that the gold market was indeed being manipulated. So we were figuring out many ways to do that. One of the things we did, after getting some support from some South African gold producers and many wonderful people around the world, we took out this ad and roll call. It's an open letter to Alan Greenspan and Lawrence Summers, and funny enough, Catherine, what are you doing with America's gold? And what happened from that is that we started a commotion here in Washington, and a lot of our people that are GATA supporters wrote to their senators and congressmen. And we have one, for example, from Lawrence Summers writing back to Senator Lieberman about this after this ad. Then we have a letter here from Alan Greenspan to Lieberman as a result of GATA putting this ad in roll call. And here we have Senator Lieberman getting back to Chris Powell. Now, as I go through a lot of these documents and we get into it, they'll be available for anybody to inspect as the luncheon goes on. Then on May 10th, 2000, Chris Powell, a fellow named Reg Howe, who I'll talk about in a little bit, who's suing these people, and a fellow named Frank Veneroso, who's a consultant for the World Bank and the IFC and so on, very distinguished fellow. We went to meet with the Speaker of the House, Speaker Hastert, and we said, Mr. Speaker, we got a big problem here. And we put this book together called Gold Derivative Banking Crisis. Now, this is almost 2 years ago, and you can imagine now in the Enron mess what was going on then. And it was supposed to be a short meeting, and it was a pretty long meeting, 45 minutes. He called Spencer Backus and had 8 of his staff come right afterwards with a meeting in the Capitol building. At that time, Congressman Backus was headed one of the subcommittees that had gold oversight, and they listened to our whole thing. And then we went on to the Senate Banking Committee. Dr. John Sylvia, their economist, and their staff, and went over this whole thing. And the next day, I took this to every member of the Banking Committee. And unfortunately, I got new shoes that day, and that was a real mistake. I had blisters for about a week. But they all were very much aware of this of what was going on and why. Now, this was almost 2 years ago before we came across all kinds of evidence about what was happening. And part of the beauty of this story for the people here and around the country on C-SPAN that will see this show that would like to know more about it, you can go to www.gata.org. GATA.org. It's a public site, and all the evidence of this, of what we're getting into here, unlike the Enron situation, is known. It's all public knowledge. And this is what's happening now. I call it a Dracula-like situation. These people that have been doing this can't stand the light of day, as Catherine was saying. And all we have to do is start asking the questions to the right people, and the jig's up. Not to be denied, after our success with our first roll call ad, we went with another one right after we had dropped this all around to all the members of Congress. Gold derivative banking crisis again, laying out the story of the potential nightmare that could occur and is going to occur, I think, at some point unfortunately, like the Enron situation. It's like we told the Speaker, said, Speaker Hastert, we found a cancer here, and it's growing, and it's bad, and it's very severe. Now, at that time, President Bush was still candidate Bush, and we said, if you don't do something about this and he wins, you all are going to have a big, big problem. They said, yes, the financial community won't like it, and I'll tell you why in a little bit, and that the treatment for the discovery of this is going to be painful like chemotherapy kind of treatments. But the patient will live. Not to do anything about it is denial. I mean, pardon me, stay in denial will be fatal. And that's what's happened to the poor people in Enron, work with Enron. And something like this is going to be far worse, I'm afraid. Ironically, that day, when people talk about conspiracies and all that kind of thing, and I have to laugh because we were always the conspiracy nuts, and now, I mean, what was the September 11th? Was a conspiracy, but, you know, by the crazy Taliban to do what they did. Enron was nothing more than a conspiracy of the accountants and the big executives and so on to do what they did. As one of our attorneys said, Bill, conspiracies and antitrust violations are commonplace. Well, ironically enough, that day, one of the people we had sort of fingered as one of the bagmen for this group, this gold cartel I call it, was a fellow named Ted Truman. We were told by one of the people that we met with that the guy, one of the staff members who was there, would go right to Ted Truman, that there was some sort of CIA connection and so on. Sure enough, that day, a few days later, Chris Powell gets a letter from who else? From Ted Truman, saying that there is no involvement of the Treasury and the gold market and so on. No one else that we know of, even though we have thousands of letters now, received a letter from Ted Truman on that same day. While the United States press is loath to touch this because it's going against the big money interest, and that's a topic for another day, but it's pretty scary when you try to deal with issues like this. I mean, why did none of the Enron analysts knew anything? The guy from Bank Paribas who was going to report on the Enron situation was fired. I hope the press really takes a close look at big business and how they're operating. I know they're doing that, and that's why I hope they get into the gold issue. But we noticed at one point, and I'll get into this lawsuit, that Deutsche Bank was very much involved in the gold market, in part of this. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, big German newspaper, came out with these articles about our gold derivative banking crisis document. And people said, what is this? There was not even any consenting opinions. Just here's what they just reported almost declaratively. And we felt that was a sign to some of the Germans to say, hey, fellas, get out of this thing. After that, we have not seen Deutsche Bank in the gold arena, at least being visible since that time.
That's why they're moving to London.
That's why they're moving to London, is right. We had Der Spiegel did an article, Conspiration im Herren Club, with Alan Greenspan on the cover. That created a commotion. When we didn't, then we went to do a follow-up. Der Spiegel was going to do a story. It was canned for some unknown reason. I think it's important for everybody here to know that half the Senate is very aware of this subject. And certainly many of the congressmen are very aware of this because we have letters back that they've written to their constituents. I've got one here from Tom Daschle. I've got one here from Senator Warner, who I know. I was fortunate to watch the Super Bowl one night out at his farm in Virginia. He's a fine guy. And there's many more letters like that. So then we decided what could GATA do to try to really get this thing exposed and get some attention, because the United States press just refused to ignore us. And as proof of that, you can go to Bloomberg and Reuters and over the last 3 years see nothing. Zero. Dow Jones has been covering this all over the place, and we're very appreciative of that coverage. But the other people, many of the major people, which no sense naming, I mean, they won't even come to listen. So we decided we'll go to South Africa, because that's where the gold producers are, and those were the people that are really getting hurt. And one of the big issues, it's going on 3 years now, was something called the proposed IMF gold sale, in which the Clinton administration was urging, especially the Secretary of the Treasury, that Secretary Summers and Rubin, that gold be sold to help the poor people in Africa and so on around the world. And we said, this is crazy. They don't, I mean, if you sell all the gold, you're going to suppress the gold price. It was 3,000 tons of IMF gold. It will suppress the price and hurt the people. So I had went, and at that point, this was actually almost 3 years ago, before one of my first trip to Washington. I met with Congressman Saxton, who was head of the Joint Economic Committee, and his economists and so on, and laid out that what this IMF gold sale was really all about. They needed the gold supply to suppress the price. So I'll get back to that in a second. So we went to South Africa, and I decided to make a tour and made appointments and so on. And I went to Johannesburg, I went to Cape Town, I went to Pretoria, and then back to Johannesburg again. I met with the Minister of Mining. I met with the King of the Zulus because the Zulu people were getting hurt so badly. I met all kinds of people, wonderful people. And again, the press didn't even really want to cover what we were doing. And what happened was, I was in Cape Town, outside of Cape Town in a beautiful vineyard area, and 4 of the South Africans fighting for a free gold market got so mad, they said, okay, we'll show them. They took out this huge ad. It's over $50,000 worth, gold price manipulation, that lays out the whole story of exactly what was going on. At the time, there was a gold conference going on down there, and this, I must say, really shook people up and woke a lot of people up. And we'll be forever grateful for the South Africans down there that, in a moment's notice, came up at a luncheon with that kind of a contribution. And they're very special people. We tried to do it as professionally as we could. We went around with all these gold derivative banking crisis documents and so on, and what we've tried to do is everything as first class as possible to, represent a good image to the people we come in contact with. That went so well, we decided to go back 3 months later and have our own summit. Be audacious enough to have a summit. Oh, what, these guys having a summit? Who are these guys? But we called it the Ghana African Gold Summit. And we had some wonderful people over there help us, and we had 5 nations attend. We had the South African Reserve Bank attended. We had the Ministry of Mines. We had the labor unions that attend, major gold producers and so on. We had national press. I was on South African Broadcasting Television 2 days in a row. It was a big deal. And what we tried to do was lay out over a whole day the story of the gold market manipulation. We had one of the people that was there, I mentioned Frank Veneroso earlier, who met with the speaker, came down to make a presentation. And I really haven't given a good enough general oversight what is really going on here. I think now I'll stop and do that. In essence, what we've discovered is that a group of bullion banks, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Chase now, Citibank, used to be Deutsche Bank, in conjunction with Exchange Stabilization Fund, the United States Treasury, the Federal Reserve Bank, the Bank for International Sales in Switzerland, have conspired to keep the gold price low for various reasons, which I'm going to get into at the end. And in doing so was the benefit for the in-the-know crowd, the big money bankers, just like the Enron situation. The big executives got everything and the little guys got nothing. And they did this at the expense of people that believed in fair play, gold companies, and the poor around the world in the sub-Saharan African countries, which this summit was all about. Now, going back to what I said about those IMF gold sales and why this is going to be, why this subject will eventually dwarf Enron. It's what we told the people at the summit and was covered in this issue. It's like Time magazine of just recently, December of this year, this issue, it came out, 9-page story on Ghana and the summit and what we had to say there in my presentation and so on. And getting back to those IMF gold sales, what happened was, I've never seen this before in American politics or in a situation in general. The administration was for it. Again, they needed this gold, this cabal gold cartel needed the gold because they're running out of gold. That's what people don't realize. They're running out of bullets to continue this scheme. So who voted against it? I had Senator Daschle's letter here. He voted against it. The Republican leadership voted against it. The Black Caucus voted against it. Can you imagine all those people together? 36 out of 41 poor gold-producing countries voted against it. Almost nobody wanted it out there because it makes common sense. Because Africa is a natural resource continent. We believe, and I'll get into that in just a second, the gold price should be well north of $600 per ounce. And it's going there, and going there maybe soon, because of what has happened. And if that were the case, instead of what the economists called Africa the hopeless continent, it would be called the boom continent. There's an epic down there that is terrible, and I was there, I saw it, with people dying of AIDS and cholera. It's really bleak, and if the gold price were let to go free, there would be enough money to start treating this. I mean, it's not going to cure it, of course, but and then it would create momentum and create jobs. When I was talking to the kids down there, the people that around the kids, there's no hope. So they just go have sex or do whatever they want to do because there's nothing to look forward to. This doesn't have to be, and this was perpetrated by this gold cartel in this scheme to benefit a certain political group and the very rich people, the bullion bankers. And that's what's going to come out. And when I even touched on the idea that there's going to be reparations called for by the African countries when they realize what this is all about. It's a very, very serious thing, and it's all going to come out just like the Enron story is going to come out. You can count on it. Now, Frank Venerosa, who I mentioned, what is the dynamic in play? This is the scary part, and this is what we were trying to talk to Congressman Hastert about, and I'll get into it. I had a direct communication with the president through some friends of his. Mine supply is only 2,500 tons a year coming out of the gold mines. The rest of the mine supply is scrap. It's around 600 tons, let's say. Frank's work, and I've known Frank since 1980, he was known as a whiz kid on Wall Street, shows that the demand is around 4,700 tons. So there's a 1,600 ton natural deficit every year that has to be filled by these people using central bank gold that's sitting there to put in the marketplace to keep this thing from going up. Now, what has happened is that we believe when Frank was down there at this presentation, and on the GATA site you can read, he's used 6 different ways to calculate this. He said that the gold loans were 10,000 to 16,000 tons, not all of which is to carry out the scheme, but a lot of it was used to perpetuate this fraud in essence. Well, now let's say it's 11,000 tons to 17,000 tons. Now go back, mine supply is 2,500 tons. What are they going to do? These people have actually, these big smart bankers are trapped. They're cornered by the women of the world wearing jewelry. They've got them. Because the gold isn't lent, it's actually been sold. It's being worn as jewelry. They can't get out. That is why every time the price of gold spikes, these people are there to knock it back. It trades like no other market ever in history because they can't let it get above a certain price because they're afraid of a short covering panic, and that's where these derivatives come in that hardly any of us understand. But it's like a neutron bomb, like Enron. I call the gold market, the move coming up will be a melt up like Enron was a meltdown. That is the dynamic in place. Now, the only thing that can stop this is the price to go up to ration the supply. What do these people do? They keep doing the same thing and keeping it because they are trapped. Now, in a second, I'm going to go over some of the things that we've uncovered that are staggering, and again, will relate to the Enron comment. But we're here trying to do the right thing for the right people. Had this come out when we first went to Congress and the banking committee members did the right thing and at least investigated it, maybe Enron wouldn't have occurred. So when people say you can't expose this because of what it will do, that is false thinking. First of all, it's just not right. And I think America and the financial world's waking up that letting things go on, as Catherine said, that aren't right just isn't good enough anymore. When the president got the information, and I won't go into the details, but I got a letter from Lawrence Lindsay the very same day my fax went to him. The situation is heating up. And I call it God's army, is out there sending letters to congressmen, doing all kinds of things over and over again. Well, one of them sent a letter to Senator Bunning, the senator from Kentucky, Hall of Fame baseball player, who sent a letter to Alan Greenspan questioning something where we saw in the documents, in these Fed minutes that were reproduced, talking about something called gold swaps. Well, they're not supposed to be trading gold. So Greenspan went to his attorney at the time. That's a copy of that letter. He went to his attorney at the time to try to get some kind of answer back to Senator Bunning, in Greenspan's way of going around doing the hoopla. So Virgil Mattingly, who was the senior counsel for the Federal Open Market Committee, said that given the passage of time, some 6 years, I have no recollection of exactly what I said that day, but I confirm that I have no knowledge of any gold swaps by the Federal Reserve or the ESF. I believe that my remarks, which were intended as a general description of the authority possessed by the Secretary of the Treasury to utilize the ESF, were transcribed inaccurately or otherwise became garbled. Now, that just doesn't pass any kind of test because the Federal Market Committee documents are scrutinized up, down, and backwards. If the Federal Open Market Committee documents are garbled and can't be counted on, why are they even doing it? And what legal document in the American system is any good anymore? All you have to do is use the garbled defense. Here it is. It's ridiculous. We have now gone beyond talking about is the gold market being manipulated. We're now into the cover-up stage, which I'll get into. So, some of the documents and the material that you have here. Again, this is an extensive subject. Anybody we're going to be here, a lot later, or you can get it on the website. The basic story is pretty simple, but when you get into the nitty-gritty, it is real complicated. And some of it's difficult for many of us, like myself, sometime to get all the details. I'm sort of like the general of GATA, and we've got all these great, or leader, or we have got great generals out there that are doing all the economic work and so on. So here's what you have we brought for you today. First, Insight magazine story that's just come out, hot off the stands by Kelly O'Mara here, who was sharp and way ahead of the pack to start to expose the facts as she sees them and so on. And this is getting around in a good way, and it's one of the first times there's been any mention of this in years. So we're grateful for Kelly, and thank you very much for letting the light come out here. Then you've got something from a fellow named Andrew Hepburn of Canada. This is the wonder of the internet. You can meet these brilliant people, and you've never met them in person. Andrew is a dog. He's a bird dog that has just gone after getting answers to questions. Now, another way that this relates to Enron. In 1999, the IMF had a meeting in Santiago, Chile, and which they discussed a bunch of things. But one of them, they told the central banks, it was like their playbook. They told the central banks that how to calculate for their gold reserves. They said, listen, you can swap your gold out, meaning it leaves the bank, and sell it and let someone else sell it in the physical market, and keep it on your books as a reserve. So that's what they said. Now, when Andrew Hepburn went to the IMF, and we have this in writing, and it's in your documents, they came back and said, no, they don't do that. So we got that in writing, and then Hepburn went, and we got responses from the ECB, the Bank of Portugal, I think it's Philippines and Finland, in which they say, no. The IMF says we're supposed to keep it on the books. We're in direct contradiction. Point I'm trying to make is that this is all in writing. It's an accounting mechanism used to deceive the public and defraud people. And anybody here that wants to go and talk to these organizations about what we found here, as Catherine said, be our guest. All we're looking for is the truth and transparency. Let them explain all of this. What what U.S. Fed and foreign officials have said about the Fed's activity in the gold market. That's another one of the documents. In this piece, which is really extraordinary, Reg Howe, who we'll be getting into shortly, came up with a paper written by Lawrence Summers when he was a professor at Harvard. And It's called Gibson's paradox, and basically it's a relationship between gold and interest rates. And he wrote that they would normally go inversely to each other. The essence of it was what they figured out, if they could keep the gold price low, because this really took place, the gold situation got out of control under Secretary Rubin and Summers in the Clinton administration around 94, 95, 96. That's when things really got going. At that time, unbeknownst to most people in America, Alan Greenspan and William McDonough took seats on the Bank for International Settlements. Out of nowhere, for no apparent reason. I mean, what reason for them? There was no reason for them technically to be there, which is, again, another big subject, which just too much to cover. But this is when it got started. And you'll notice in your chart, when you go to read it, you'll see in 1996, the relationship went way off kilter, just completely changed, which fits right in of the motive for suppressing the price of gold, to deceive people in America about inflation, to keep interest rates lower than they would be, and to keep the dollar strong. You've all heard about the strong dollar policy. Can anybody tell me not now, we'll do this in question and answer, what the strong dollar policy is and how it's implemented? What did they actually do besides saying we want a strong dollar? I mean, they had to do something. This is what they did. They manipulated the gold price. That's your strong dollar policy. The problem is now it's coming apart. Accounting for the ESF's gold swaps. This is brilliant work by a fellow named James Turk. In essence, we have the ESF and the Secretary of the Treasury and so on caught in what they've been doing in the Exchange Stabilization Fund. So much so, we have a staff member of Congressman Paul's office, which he'll mention. He'll just quickly tell you what the bill's about in a second. But so much so that Congressman Paul's introducing a bill very shortly saying that if the President of the United States and Secretary of the Treasury, who are the only two people, by the way, who have responsibility for this Exchange Stabilization Fund, if they want to do whatever they want to do in the gold market, he's asking them for congressional approval. Now, when anybody here goes to, and by the way, the Treasury can't answer for the ESF. Any reporter here wants to go to Secretary O'Neill, as Catherine said, just ask them about the material that's here and their swap operations and so on. They're in big trouble, big trouble. So, and we have another piece by Reg Howe, and then I'm going to get into, this has to do with the derivative problem, because if you're looking for the next Enron, let's hope it doesn't happen, but J.P. Morgan Chase's derivatives are $29 trillion. I mean, and part of this controlling the gold market has to do with they can't have volatility. I mean, will be a disaster. It'd be like these, you can imagine these like a machine, the volatility going like this, and all of a sudden, I mean, who knows what Morgan has? I mean, I think 23 trillion of his interest rate derivatives or something. It's just, it's a ridiculous number. Who knows? Nobody thought Enron could happen either, and look at what's happened. And you've got the same kind of situation developing there. So they need to keep the gold price down. But the problem is the gold price doesn't want to stay down. It's starting to move. Now, two more quick things, and I'll end. Is that one is the gold cartel. Reg Howe, one of our supporters and a very sharp Boston lawyer, has sued these 5 billion banks and the BIS, William McDonough, Alan Greenspan, the Secretary of the Treasury, in Massachusetts federal court. You have a copy of that lawsuit in your material. The other side, as they always try to get a motion to dismiss 3 months ago, Judge Lindsay in Massachusetts has not ruled on that yet. We're very hopeful that he'll allow us to, to go into discovery just to get to the truth. That's all we're asking. Just get to the truth. If they go into discovery, they're in trouble. I mean, this gold market is going to go bananas because we know who to ask. We know what questions to ask. It'd be just like going to the Enron thing. Just imagine Enron before it went down and us going to ask those questions. That's what's coming. I guarantee it. It's coming. You can't predict the time in these things, but it's there. And the other scary thing, and you know, I mentioned to high-level people in the government, our government, I said, look, while you're allowing this scheme to go on and dumping ridiculous gold at $275, $300 an ounce, the Russians are buying, the Chinese are buying, the Japanese now, there's getting a lot of public attention. Their whole public's buying because their banking system's in trouble. As I said, the Muslims are buying, the Arabs are buying. And I've been reporting this all along. And so what they're doing is, and they think bigger picture. We think very short term. They're just buying the gold, say, thank you very much, thank you very much, thank you very much. And we keep selling it and selling it and selling it. And the slingshot's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. That's what's happening. So it's not good, but it's got to be dealt with now. There's no point in continuing the fraudulent ways that's been going on. And it's all here. We have it all documented. There's so much more which we can't get into here today, but I want to thank you very much for coming and so on. But before we get into questions and answers, I would like to introduce my colleague, a guy who's my hero. 3 years working days, nights, weekends, has their own Got a List, which is up now to about 1,800 people. Does all these books, answers every letter. He's an American hero in my book, Chris Powell.
Thank you, Bill. I got into town last night, and I wanted to go for a walk after being a little cramped on the train. And I walked down 14th Street, and down one of the side streets, I saw a building that looked just like the building in the famous Gotta painting by Alan Despair. So I had to walk down 2 blocks and see what it was, and sure enough, it was the Treasury Department. And I walked to the north entrance and looked at the statue of Albert Gallatin, our first Secretary of the Treasury, and I raised my fist at the building and I demanded Paul O'Neill to come out and answer some questions. They didn't hear me, and then I walked around to the east face of the building, and I saw that it was draped all along the whole block for hundreds of yards. They say the building's being renovated, but in my paranoid fantasies, I thought maybe they knew we were coming and they were preparing the cover-up. I leave that to the press people here to find out. But that is really the issue here, cover-up, surreptitiousness. Gatta's complaint is essentially that the United States, the Treasury Department, the Federal Reserve, the Exchange Stabilization Fund, are surreptitiously underwriting the gold leasing, which is actually gold selling, by foreign central banks. And in doing this, is putting the gold reserves of the United States, nominally 8,000 tons, at a horrible risk. In fact, our consultant, James Turk, has already estimated, having gone through the consolidated books of the United States, that 20 or 25% of the gold reserves of the United States are very likely already pledged to foreign central banks to underwrite their gold leasing. Now, under the Gold Reserve Act of 1934, the government has the legal authority to enter the gold market, to buy and sell gold, and even to do more complicated transactions in gold. However, back in 1975, Congress re-legalized the private ownership in gold and reestablished a fair market in gold. And we maintain that to read those statutes consistently, the government cannot be allowed to surreptitiously set the price of gold. That is, if the government is going to intervene in the gold market, it has to let the world know what its policy is. Our complaint is that the United States has a surreptitious gold policy, and it is surreptitious because if it was public, it would not stand the light of day. There would be outrage. Americans would not want their gold reserves put at risk, mainly to expropriate the third world and enrich the Wall Street bullion banks in New York. Now, the fun thing about all this, thanks to Gatta's research and especially research done by our consultants, Red Chow, James Turk, Mike Bolser, Andrew Hepburn, is that all this stuff, while not really articulated as such, is out there on the public record. It is available to anyone who wants to go looking for it. And it's really far beyond that reference to gold swaps that we found in the Federal Open Market Committee meeting minutes of January 1995. There's all sorts of other things. There's accounting data, which is described in the packet that we've given you. But nobody really is putting it together. Now, why is this important? It's important, I think, first because, as Catherine suggested, gold is real, and it is one of the few real things remaining in this unreal world of paper and digitized money. I think we're going to wake up one day and long for that real world again. I think we already are longing for it when we have shocks, as we've had with Enron, as we will have with other corporations, when we wake up and realize that there is really nothing there. Well, gold may be, as Keynes said, a barbaric relic, but it is something. It is real. It is something that you can put in your closet or under your mattress, and it'll be there in the morning, which is more than we can say for Enron and the financial instruments Enron dealt in. So it's important because gold is real, and I think we have to cling to what is real in this very deceitful age that we're living in. It's important because gold is not everything, but it is, I think, in a small way, the measure of all things financial. Indeed, it is probably most important because it is the inverse of interest rates, which are even more important than gold. And the government knows this. Lawrence Summers, formerly Treasury Secretary, now president of Harvard, determined this in an academic paper he wrote about 12 years ago, pretty much laying out in public and in a public academic magazine the whole gold suppression scheme. Now, he was not advocating the suppression of the gold price because he had any particular feeling about gold itself. He was advocating it because he figured out that if you suppress the gold price, you could have low interest rates. The market would be deceived. You may remember when President Clinton came into the office, he was quoted famously as expressing resentment of his economic advisors' urgings that he had to direct his whole administration to the health and welfare of the bond market. And he made the remark about, geez, you know, they're turning us into Eisenhower Republicans. Well, Larry Summers' paper, I think, was basically Clinton's revenge, his deceit of the bond market. Summers told him, and told the world, for anybody who wanted to read it, that the way to deceive the bond market was to suppress the gold price. That if the bond market saw the gold price was low, it would keep interest rates low. The barometer would be tampered with. It's on the public record. The man went on to become Assistant Secretary of the Treasury and Secretary of the Treasury. He wrote the roadmap for the gold suppression scheme. You can read that article. I don't know why he's never asked about it, but he wrote the roadmap before he went into the Treasury Department that said, we can keep interest rates low if the government will simply suppress the gold price. Now, again, people may maintain that that's a good policy. And we don't necessarily have a position on that. Everybody thinks we're gold bugs. Everybody thinks we're gold standard people. Well, some of us are, but you know, most of all, we are free market people, and we're people who want a fair deal for people in the markets, and we want accountability in government. And if the government is going to intervene in the gold market, as it has the legal authority to do under the Gold Reserve Act, we maintain it must do it publicly and not surreptitiously. Doing it surreptitiously it needs allies. It needs agents to accomplish its work, to provide it cover. Those allies, like Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank and a few others, having the insider knowledge of government policy, are able to trade the markets on the basis of that inside knowledge and make billions in the gold carry trade. That is terribly unfair to ordinary investors in the United States. It's also devastating to the developing world, most of whose economies are based on commodities, gold to some extent, but commodities generally, which take their price cues from the gold price. Now, most economic decisions, we believe, that have been made all around the world in the last 8 years or so have been based on a false premise. That is, on this fundamental misreading of the strength of the U.S. dollar, the level of inflation, and the fair prices of commodities. Things have gotten so out of hand that we now have stock valuations that bear no resemblance to anything we've ever known, and that bubble is popping. We argue that the stock market bubble and the stress in the market now and the huge danger that we see in the markets now is a direct result of the United States government's surreptitiously underwriting the gold carry trade. There's another reason why this is important. The gold carry trade and the surreptitious underwriting of it by the U.S. government, we believe, is the biggest, most effective device of imperialism in the world today. Now, I don't want to sound like some crazy lefty like some of the people that Bill was with at Ralph Nader's conference in this town a few weeks ago. But think about it. If a foreign power occupied, say, South Africa and put hundreds of thousands of soldiers and tanks and warplanes there and plundered the country, ran off with its wealth, it would be terribly painful, but people would know what was happening. People would know how it was happening. People would know who their enemy was. If, however, you manipulate the world financial markets by forcing the U.S. dollar on the world through the IMF as the only reserve currency in the world, make people use that dollar, and then basically destroy all objective standards of value so that countries like South Africa and other third world countries that produce real things, produce commodities, basically have to produce them below cost or at very marginal profit simply to survive. They don't know where their poverty is coming from. They don't know who their oppressors are. They think it's just the natural order of things. This strong dollar policy that Bill talked about, which is basically the surreptitious suppression of the gold price, is, we believe, a ruthless imperialist device by which American control is projected over the world. Now, I'm as much of an American and I think a patriot as anybody in this room, maybe everybody in this town. And I believe in the old saying, my country right or wrong, but it is when right to be kept right and when wrong to be set right. We believe this is a horrible wrong. It is a crime against the people of the United States. It threatens to expropriate their national wealth and the gold reserves that have been built up so laboriously over the last 200 years, and it is a crime against the developing world. It is the cause of the catastrophic misallocation of capital and credit that we've seen in this country over the last 10 years. And the damnedest thing is, it is all right there on the public record in a few places that we've listed for you today in those packages that we've passed out. We implore the journalists among you to ask questions, demand answers about United States gold policy from Secretary O'Neill and from the President, who really are the only ones who can answer under the law for the Exchange Stabilization Fund. And we implore all of you as citizens to contact your elected representatives and demand a complete and candid explanation from our government of this policy toward gold. I've been involved in the newspaper business in Connecticut for more than 30 years now, and I have known quite a number of people in public life in Connecticut, including most of the members of our congressional delegation, some of whom I've been fairly close to for 20 or 30 years. And I cannot get them now to, and sometimes even to answer, acknowledge my mail on this issue. Formerly, some of them were very helpful. I have gotten the distinct impression that this is being treated as a national security issue, as something that cannot be discussed, something that is too horrible and devastating to be looked at. Well, we owe it to our country to correct this. We believe that public policy in the United States, a democracy, has got to be public policy. And we believe we owe this to the world because we are we're the leader of justice in the world. That flag is the standard to which all decent people have always been able to repair. And this is a horrible, horrible thing. It cannot stand the light of day. It's on the public record. We've shown you where it is. We've told you what questions have to be asked. And we ask for your support. Thanks very much.
What time do we have there? Anybody?
1:30.
Okay, then we're going to go another 15 minutes.
Where's the fellow from the Australian Financial Review? I've got his.
But we're going to go another 15 minutes here and ask questions. Catherine, could you come up here, please? And Chris, when you come back, can anybody have a question here you'd like for any of us here? And we have the C-SPAN's people are going to be nice enough to go around and put the mic in front of you so everybody can hear. Go ahead, wherever you like. Go ahead. Say your name, please.
Yep. Martin Hutchinson, United Press International. I have one political question and then a couple of economic ones. The political question is, if this was a plot by the Clinton administration, Rubin, Summers and that lot, then why the heck didn't the Bush administration stop it immediately it came in, doubtless cause an economic collapse, but be able to blame it on the plotting of the previous administration? Economically, firstly, I don't believe the gold price is out of line. If you look at the late 50s, which is when the last time the thing was in balance, gold was then $35 an ounce. The consumer price index is up about 8-fold since then. It's sort of 520 on 1967. That would suggest a gold price of $270 an ounce now, which doesn't look far off where we are. Thirdly, low interest rates, of course, help emerging markets because they're big borrowers. Look, for example, at Argentina, which has been allowed to stagger on for an extra couple of years because interest rates were low. And fourthly, I must say I disagree with the thesis that commodity prices, except for one or two like silver, are set by the gold price. It doesn't seem to me there's very much correlation.
Okay, I got to see if I can remember all the questions. First of all, I'll answer the first one when it comes to the why didn't the Bush administration do something? We hoped that they would, and as I said, that's why we went to go see the Speaker of the House and so on. There's an intriguing development here in that the first President Bush was on the board of Barrick Gold, who we've, in Canada, one of the world's largest gold producers, who we've associated with what I call, my nickname for it is the gold cartel. They've had very aggressive hedging policies. They're very close to the Morgan bankers. We think they're very much, as Chris said, they're one of the allies of the people doing this. I think former Prime Minister Mulroney in Canada is also on the board and so on. It's a very political gold organization. They've added a lot of gold supply to that. So we don't know what could have happened under the first Bush administration. It might have been just sort of a rinky-dink operation, and then it got on steroids under Rubin, Clinton, and Summers. Regarding the price, for just relating it as a commodity, knowing what I explained to you before, and I use Frank Venerosa's work, he felt that 4 years ago it would take at least $600 to get the supply-demand equilibrium and balance. So it's 4 years later, and the problem has gotten much worse. Time will see who's right here on this one. I just think pick a number, but it's well north of $600 now. What it's going to take this to solve the problem, and that's what the people that are involved in the scheme are so afraid of.
Okay. Let me take a crack at it. Because the fellow asked the question, I think he's very smart. But on this one, we disagree, Martin. I think you're very smart, but on this, we disagree. How do I know what I'm willing to pay for this apple? I know because I can see it, so I can price it. I can price it because I know, for me, how much it's worth, right? Because I can see it. The problem is, all free markets and all democracy require transparency. And they require transparency because I need to know, with less than 1,000 hours of hard work, reading all this stuff, how to price what gold's worth. Now, I have no idea what the price of gold would be if the markets were, in my opinion, free to trade. What I will tell you this is that all political questions, if you read history, all political questions come down to issues of centralization versus decentralization. I'm a member of the decentralization team. I love democracy and markets because they decentralize, and no one is as smart as all of us. So if we're all bidding and pricing and growing and making apples and eating apples, the price will be an honest communication device about how we all feel about apples and how much time and effort it takes to grow apples. The problem we have today is not just that the price of gold is being manipulated. The problem we have is we don't understand what's happening in the gold market. Just like we don't understand what's happening in the accounting for the stock market. You know, is the stock market at 9,800, or after you uncook all the books, you know, and delete Arthur Andersen from all the different auditing accounts, is the stock market at 5,000, or is it at 4,000, or where is it? But we don't have enough time in the world to get in and duplicate all of Arthur Andersen's accounting. All we know is it's no longer clear what a fair price is, because all the money tools we depend on, whether it's the currency or gold or honest accounting, our money tools, it appears we can't trust them anymore. So I don't know what the price of gold is. What I will tell you, because I am one of the world's leading experts in this, is the government books of the United States are not worth the paper they're printed on. Get HUD's financial statements. It's a joke. I could do a Saturday Night Live, but one of the things I could never do as the former Assistant Secretary of Housing is tell you what's going on in the money there, other than there, as the trucker said, the big boys are stealing all the money. All I can tell you is, you know, the head of the Appropriations Committee thinks it's a criminal enterprise and then gave him another $1.7 billion. Okay? That's a fact. So what I can tell you is the books are cooked, whether it's companies or the government. I can't tell what anything is worth when the books are cooked. And the reason I want to make sure the price of gold is free is at least that's one thing, as Chris said, that's real. I mean, I'll tell you, in Hickory Valley, we understand the importance of gold. So what we want is we want a transparent world, because whether it's voting as a citizen in a democracy or voting as a consumer in the marketplace, we want to be able to figure out what something's worth without 1,000 hours of brain damage, no offense, brain damage trying to figure out what the price of gold ought to be. I don't want to have that conversation with you. I want a free market so I know what it's worth. you know, so that I can stay. So what I want is I want transparency. What in the world? Why are all these smart guys? They may be wrong, but why are they so upset? And why do I have to spend 1,000 hours to figure it out? I ought to be able to click on the internet and, you know, go to the Office of the Control of the Currency, and I ought to be able to learn within an hour what a derivative is. And if I can't, then something wrong is going on. I don't know what it is, but you're the press. Do your duty.
Martin, I think I can pick up on two of your questions anyway. Why is the current administration seemingly continuing the surreptitious suppression of the gold price? Boy, I'd love somebody to ask them. But my guess is simply they've looked into it and figured that it is so big that it simply cannot be unwound quickly without consequences it would consider politically catastrophic. Or at least, for example, it very likely would cause the failure of J.P. Morgan Chase. Is J.P. Morgan Chase too big to fail? Or, as John Crudell in the New York Post remarked, I thought pretty cleverly the other day, is it also too big to bail? It's probably both. Morgan has the overwhelming majority of gold and interest rate derivatives reported to the Office of the Controller of the Currency. This itself has always struck us as another antitrust violation. Now, how did all these derivatives in gold and interest rates get concentrated at one firm that traditionally has been the banker for the United States government?
Good credit rating.
Well,
If you find your derivatives on a triple B, you will go bankrupt, as Enron has discovered. Morgan's, before the Chase got involved, Morgan's was the best credit rating in the U.S., and that's why it did all the derivatives business, because they're the only one people would deal with.
That's fine. It also has something like 70% of the market, which in any other market would be an antitrust violation on its face. I suggest that Morgan's good credit rating is a matter, to a great extent, of its being backstopped by the United States government and by its having inside knowledge of United States government policy, which most of us are not given. Now, my guess is that the current administration is just trying to muddle about, looking for some long-term way out. The U.S. Mint recently reclassified the gold kept at West Point, which is a substantial gold depository, as something called deep storage gold. This has evoked a lot of snickering in our corner. We think we know what deep storage means. Deep storage means it's still in the ground in Nevada somewhere, and yet to be mined. And you can laugh, but I don't think that's so far off. I think one way to get out of this situation is to try to manage the price, continue to manage it with derivatives and intimidating the market, and dig your way out of it with the next decade of gold production. And so to replace the borrowed gold, the gold lent to the central banks of Europe with new production over the next 10 or 12 years. I don't think the market's going to let them get away with that, because I think the supply-demand deficit is too extreme. The other way out of it is simply to write the gold loans as sold at a below-market price, and that's what I think is going to happen. I think that when gold goes to 350 or 400 or whatever, and Morgan becomes the next Enron, or is in danger of becoming the next Enron, the U.S. government, or through its associated central banks in Europe or whatever, will basically rewrite the gold leases so that gold has not been lent, it has been sold at, say, maybe $300 an ounce when the market price is substantially more than that. That will bail out Morgan and the other gold shorts at the expense of the American taxpayer who earned that gold. It will not be the first bailout. It may of really private financial interests, but it may be the biggest one we've ever seen. Now, you asked about commodity prices. You don't think gold is a good proxy for commodities. I'm not going to bore everybody here with an argument with you on that, but I did bring with me one copy of an article that's posted on www.gold-eagle.com, to give that excellent website a little credit. An essay by an economist named Peter Warburton, who has looked at the gold carry trade as part of the bigger derivatives picture in other markets. And it is his opinion that the gold carry trade and derivatives generally are part of a scheme by governments, central banks, to deprive us of all objective standards of value, so that we really can't tell what anything's worth except insofar as the government gives something its nominal worth. He holds very vigorously that gold is a proxy for commodities, and he suggests a whole range of new things that perhaps we could use if the government's going to take gold away from us. And if you can hang around when we're done here, I'll see if I can't dig that out for you.
1 second. Just at this time, like Norman, would you just say a few words here about the bill?
Sure.
And introduce yourself, please.
Yeah. My name is Norman Singleton. I'm a legislative director for Congressman Ron Paul, 14th District of Texas, and member of the House Financial Services Committee. Congressman Paul is very concerned about many of the issues that we've discussed here today, and he's going to be introducing legislation later this week. Very simple. It doesn't prohibit the Treasury or the president from engaging in any kind of gold transaction. It simply says that before they do, they have to get the explicit consent of Congress, thus restoring Congress's constitutional role in monetary policy. And also addressing some of the concerns about transparency, because every time now there's a transaction buying or selling gold, you'll be able to go on Thomas, look for a bill number, see that it was submitted to Congress on a certain date, it was approved on a certain date, and you'll be able to see which members of Congress voted to allow the government to have this authority and which members voted against allowing the government to intervene in the gold market.
Thanks, Norman. Go Congressman Paul here on this one. I hope you'll all pay attention to it. Yes.
Do you know in your work, have you come across any other markets that are being manipulated? For example, do you share the belief that the Clinton administration or the Fed intervened in the stock market several times during the 90s?
Well, there's a lot of talk about that. I'm sorry.
For the benefit of someone in Hickory Valley, could you describe what happens when the short covering panic starts from the point of view of one of the banks involved?
Okay, I'll just hand what was the first question again? I went right to the second one.
Stock market.
Oh, yeah. There's something called the Working Group on Financial Markets. It's all the big boys, a lot of the same crowd we're talking about here. It's all public knowledge. There's a good feeling out there among our people that the, quote, markets are being stabilized after September 11th. They all came out and said, we're going to stabilize the markets. That's on the public record. So, but that's a different subject, a different time. I'm specialist in the manipulation of the gold market. I think the silver market, the same thing has been done too, but I have no evidence of that. But I think I'll let Hickory Valerie here. That's right up your alley.
The way I explain this, because we barbecue cooks on Friday night. We sit at Hickory Valley Meat Market and we discuss these things. I think and before I say this, Norman, I just have to tell you that sitting on my desk is my Ron and Carol Paul cookbook, and I keep it there because it really helps me know that there's at least one guy in Congress who's still trying to do the right thing for transparency. So if you would tell him that. But what we talk about is whether or not something is accessible. I mean, and I hate to be redundant, but if we can understand it within a reasonable period of time and say it in English, then it's trustworthy. And if you can't understand why all these guys are so upset, and you can't understand what the banks are doing in the gold market, and I have to tell you, one of the reasons I believe they're doing it in the gold market is, I've had personal experience with them doing it in other markets. So, kind of once a guy's a criminal, you just He's always a criminal. But I think in Hickory Valley, what we believe is that if it's not simple and we can't understand it, it's not because we're stupid, it's because something funny's going on.
No, the question was, walk me through in simple terms, what happens when there is a short covering panic taken from the point of view of one of the banks involved? What will people see? What will happen?
You know, Sam, I honestly don't know, because when you're short, when you're short that much gold, when you're short a position of gold, which is much more than the entire, we did this with jelly beans the other day. What would happen in the jelly bean market when you're short 1,000 jelly beans and the Jelly Bean Manufacturers of America only make 100 jelly beans a year? So I've never seen a market where you're short 1,000 and you can only get physical production that year of 100. I can't imagine, because what you're talking about is an inelastic demand. You must buy what you need to cover your shorts and no supply. And that's when a supply, and frankly, that's when the reconciliation of a market stops being a financial matter and starts being a national security matter. Because there's only one way to get that much gold at once, and that's to go physically steal it.
Go ahead.
Christine Dolan. Catherine and Bill and Chris, I remember about 17 years ago in this town when Tony Coelho and the Democrats wanted to take on the Reagan administration and talk about the deficit. And I remember they held up charts and they were absolutely talking gobbledygook because nobody really understood. And the one thing that I kept on hammering away at the time when I was at CNN was bring the story home. Take it to the kitchen table. Put it in a context of the average American, not Wall Street, not an economist, not somebody who works for Treasury, not a lawyer, for God's sakes. The average mom and dad out there in America can understand what it is and what the relationship is and why they should even care about the story. Because you can't get the press on board of a story that they can't sell to the American public. And the American public can't do anything about the problem unless they understand it. So it's almost reducing it to what does it mean in terms of their kitchen table?
I think it's very simple, and that is to ask, the books are cooked. The books are not trustworthy, whether they're corporate stocks. I mean, Arthur Andersen has admitted to not only cooking the books, but shredding the documents. That's obstruction of justice, ladies and gentlemen. That's a criminal violation. Arthur Andersen enjoys many government contracts today. You can be fired for convenience by the federal government in 24 hours. Is Arthur Andersen fired? Or are they inside government corporations dealing with some of our most sensitive information systems today? Okay? Pug Winokur, chairman of the Enron Finance Committee, stood up in testimony on Thursday and said, I was misled by my accountants, which is, in English in Hickory Valley, that's Arthur Andersen lied to me. Pug Winokur is the chairman of the Compensation Committee of DynCorp. Who's DynCorp's auditors? Arthur Andersen. If you're the chairman of the Compensation Committee and the lead investor in a company, and you said that your accountants on this company cooked the books and then shredded the documents and tricked you, would you continue to use them over here where you're the lead investor on the other company? Would your partner, Dudley Meekum, member of the board of Citicorp, go along and agree with that? And if you would, how can we, as the American people, allow him to be on the board of one of the largest banks who uses the federal credit? I mean, I go back, it's very simple, Christine. We don't know what's happening, but we know that it's not transparent, and the people who are telling us that we can trust it, i.e. Arthur Andersen, are not trustworthy. So it's simple. They're lying. If any of you know the story of the boundary stones and farmers, they're sneaking the fence over on us. It's very simple, and what we need to do first is to hold them accountable. We want transparency. We want anybody who lies. We want anybody who cooks books, and we want anybody who shreds document fired. We want somebody in there we can trust, and we want to find out what's going on. We want transparency. That's a simple story. And in the gold market, all you have to do is ask Secretary O'Neill to explain to you, so the people in Hickory Valley, because it's not Bill's job to make this transparent to the people in Hickory Valley. Secretary O'Neill is paid to make it transparent to the people in Hickory Valley, and you, the members of the press, are paid to hold him accountable to explain it. Okay?
Christine, without becoming more of a polemicist than I was a few minutes ago, and that Catherine just became, if we are going to propagandize this or try to drive it home with people, a good way might be to say that, to a great extent, the gold carry trade, the surreptitious intervention by the United States government in the gold market has been done largely to distort values, really, as Warburton wrote, really to deprive us of our usual standards of values, so that only the government and I think the Wall Street investment houses can tell us what anything is worth. Last year, not just Enron employees, but investors all over the country, including the Connecticut State Pension Fund, where I come from, Connecticut, thought they had hundreds and hundreds and billions of dollars in Enron stock. And pretty quickly, over the course of the last 6 months or so, they woke up and found out there was nothing there. I think it's the same throughout the markets. Equity prices are grotesquely inflated beyond what our traditional standards would provide. And the destruction of those standards, I think, is what the gold carry trade is about. Now, I think it was, I know it was Martin, somebody asked about, maybe it wasn't, somebody asked about intervention in the general equities markets. Well, we do not have as much public documentation on that as we do, really, I think you have proof of government intervention in the gold market. However, some of our statistical people who are very sharp have studied market fluctuations and have found repeated reversals of the general stock indexes at strategic moments over the last couple of years that, in their view, defy all probability. There's anecdotal evidence, some of it published again by John Crudell in the New York Post, that the market has been, the general equities markets have been manipulated, have been supported at crucial times by 2 or 3 of the same firms buying with the coordinated buying of stock index futures, stuff that probably doesn't happen by accident. Now, we can't prove that, the purpose of that today. If our lawsuit in U.S. District Court in Boston is allowed to proceed and we are granted enough discovery and deposition authority, I'm sure we could ask some very interesting questions of the authorities. But I think most of us in the Gold Antitrust Action Committee are thoroughly convinced that in addition to surreptitiously intervening against the gold price, the U.S. government is underwriting the support of the stock market through the purchase of index futures.
Go ahead.
Bill, Terry Crown, I just wanted to make a couple comments. What I'm seeing really here from you guys is you're telling us that there's a worm in the apple, and you brought the apple with you. But the apple side that's facing us looks good. It's rosy, and we've been talking about that. What you're saying, there's worms there. Step around here and look.
That's exactly
okay?
right.
So I think that's the least maybe the press in this country could do, is step around and look at the worm.
Terry, that's a very good point. All we would like is to have this be discussed. If we're wrong, that's fine. I'll tell you one thing of interest, is that since we started this, where we've been called all kinds of things, especially in the early days, but not one person in the gold industry has taken our documents individually and said where we were wrong. And over this 3-year period, from the very first idea of what was going on, all the evidence that we have found has suggested that we were right in the first place. In other words, let's say there's 300 pieces of evidence. Not one of our 300 pieces of evidence contradicted the very first day of what we thought was going on. And this is what's so amazing, and it's all here, as Chris said. Next, we'll just take a couple more, and then we're going to wrap up.
A couple quick points. If the press is really interested in these issues, there's a couple bullets. There may be a stronger Enron tie to this bullion market through the LBMA. I believe they had an LBMA membership. It cost $450,000. I don't think you spend that money lightly. Something to look into. O'Neill has stonewalled legitimate due process questions, it's my understanding. This is a dangerous situation. He needs to look at that. I don't want any comment on this. It's just a couple bullets for the press. The other thing is, Auerbach and Barron's reported that Greenspan was doing some shredding. How does that tie into this? And then finally, Greenspan and McDonough on the board of the BIS. If you look deeply into that issue, how ethical is that? It's my understanding that originally we weren't going to have any representation on the BIS. And so those are 3 or 4 main topic items that there could be some transparency on.
Remark, you know, the BIS issue is very much part of our lawsuit, but I just wanted to stress that the government intervention in the gold markets is nothing new. Congress used to set the price of gold by legislation. The Washington Agreement of a couple years ago was nothing if it was not a formal public conspiracy, if you will, of the European central banks to regulate the price of gold through regulating their gold leasing. Alan Greenspan, a couple of years ago, testifying as Fed chairman to the Senate Agriculture Committee and the House Banking Committee, acknowledged central banks stand ready to lease gold in increasing quantities should the price rise. That's almost his direct quote. And lest somebody rebut that by saying, oh, well, he was talking in the context of derivative legislation and giving a hypothetical. We had Congressman Wright Greenspan to explain what he meant by that. And he backed off, not by saying it was a hypothetical. He backed off by saying, oh, well, my central bank's not having anything to do with this. However, this is what I have perceived the other central banks doing. That is, the chairman of the United States Federal Reserve Board has told a member of Congress, Senator Lieberman, that he has seen the central banks of other countries leasing gold in order to suppress the price. The Washington Agreement was the collusion of many of those central banks, maybe not to lease quite as much gold as they would have been doing ordinarily. The regulation of the gold price by governments is an open conspiracy. It's just not looked at that way. We are trying to get the press to look at it, to understand its purposes and extent.
Okay, go ahead.
Houston. Chris, how are you? I wonder if you could explain to the press how it is that a gold mining company can go bankrupt as the price of gold rises.
The reason they essentially went bankrupt and their price fell, I think, by a factor of 90%, was that they had been persuaded by their bullion bankers to get into the gold derivative market and essentially make money either by selling gold short, a lot of which they didn't have at the time, or by selling options to promising to provide the gold if the price rose. And then all of a sudden, after the Washington Agreement, the price of gold momentarily got out of hand, and the derivative books for Ashanti and Cambior blew up. And they had promised, in certain circumstances, to deliver more gold than they owned. Now, very interesting part of that is that Ashanti is a very big company. Cambior is a small company. Ashanti's bankers was either Morgan or Goldman Sachs. I can't remember. It was a Goldman?
Goldman Sachs was the chief advisor.
Okay. Goldman was the banker that put Ashanti in this terrible derivative situation and essentially wiped out, I think, look, Ashanti now I think is running around $4 a share. Before the Washington Agreement, it was above 10. Ashanti has been down, I think, as low as $2 a share. Well, that's what excessive, shorting of gold, entry into the unadvisable but advised entry into the derivative markets did to those gold companies, and that is why the companies. The mining companies that are doing very well now in the modest rally we've had in gold over the last few months are the unhedged companies, that is, those companies that have not gotten into the derivatives market, have not sold any of their gold in advance, or have not really speculated in the derivatives market as Ashanti and Cambior did when maybe they didn't really know they were doing it.
Go ahead, just a couple more here. Go ahead.
Hello, Sean Trainer. I want to stray just a moment to try to bring this down to the table again for Americans to maybe pay attention to. I was privy to some meetings in Kuwait for the first week of February regarding a business issue that we're doing, and the Kuwaitis are almost running in the same imperialism attitude to the U.S. government that Chris talked about. We went in there during Desert Storm. We're still siphoning billions of dollars off of their bank accounts. And what does this do to impact the United States? Well, if there is no gold for the United States and we're totally backing everything on the U.S. dollar, 2/3 of the world's reserves are in U.S. dollars. The only thing backing our currency right now is our military. And our military is all over the world pushing, and what's happening now is you have a currency that can compete with the U.S. dollar called the euro. And China and several other Middle Eastern countries are looking to move their reserves from U.S. dollars to euros. And what happens to the United States when these dollars start to come back into the United States? When all of a sudden Japan is already on the verge of bankruptcy. Their government's not going to back their banking facilities after April 1st. So what happens when these countries start to release this reserve and move to a different currency and all these digits start to come back into the United States? How does that affect the American people? Especially when we have no wealth left to back that. I think that's something the press needs to take this to heart and get this story going, because we are going to be very liable to the rest of the world at that point.
Good point, Sean.
I've been writing for a couple months now, Tom Flacco, on the purchase of the contracts, the insider trading, and I had found, of course, the airlines, the obvious, the companies in the tower, and Bayer and Cipro and so forth, and there are indications that it's in the billions in Europe. I've heard and reported figures of $7 to $15 billion of profits made via contracts purchased, put options prior to the attacks in the World Trade Center. And I began to think, and that's what caught my mind when you had invited us to this program here at the luncheon. Regarding gold, because gold is it's a store of value. There's a flight to gold when there are times of trouble, and I was wondering whether you had maybe seen any indications with your researchers because there is research that there's tremendous spikes, 200% and 300%, 400% spikes in hotels, in the airlines, in the 38 companies that were in the tower, and the 3 insurance companies in Europe, Munich Re, French AXA, and Swiss Re. And had you seen any indication of people buying derivative contracts in gold prior to the attacks? And if so, do you have any idea of volume?
No, I really don't, Tom. Again, it's all good points, but again, we try to stay very focused on what we have. As you can see here with all the material we presented, it is voluminous. It's like a War and Peace thing when you try to read it all. There's so much evidence here. I haven't seen it, but could it be going on? Yes. And just one quick thing I'd like to explain that Chris mentioned that we might not have covered clearly enough. What is this gold carry trade? This is part of the ripoff, is that These big banks, these big bullion banks, have been able to borrow money interest-free all these years. How would you like to go to your banker and say, Mr. Banker, I like to borrow money, but I'll pay you a 0.5% interest rate, instead of going to the bank and paying 10% like the American public has got to do. What they do is the central bank has gold sitting there. They go borrow the gold, they sell the gold into the physical marketplace, which helps to depress the supply. They take the proceeds and they can invest it in treasuries at 5 or 6%, or do whatever they want with it. They've got interest-free money. There's a trick to this. Now, they've been doing this for 7 years. They have made billions at the expense of what all of us have been talking about today, the people and the poor people in the world, and people who believed in free markets. They have made billions because they knew they had interest-free money to play in the markets. Now, the trick is, now, under this short position is, I think, probably about 15,000 tons. The trick is they have to go pay it back. They have to buy the bullion and pay it back to the banks. That's what these called loans or swaps are. But that's why they won't let the price go up, because as soon as it goes up, they hit it down. It's been doing this for years. The price will spike up, hit it down, spike up, hit it down. The problem is they're afraid, as I mentioned, this neutron bomb, this derivative thing, when it starts to go 325 bid, it could be 525 bid to ration this thing. They're trapped. They cannot get out. And that's the problem. But that's what this gold carry trade is, this fraud that's helped to build this whole thing. And now they got a nightmare on their hands. And this is what has to be dealt with. And this is the story that they don't want you to know about or don't want you to hear, which is why we're here today. One more and then we're going to wrap it up.
Ralph Cattell, I believe that there's a bigger national defense issue than just the gold itself. We had some number of tens or 50 billion ounces of silver it's common knowledge that has now been sold off in the form of coins by the U.S. Treasury. You're telling us 15,000 ounces of tons of gold are sold. Well, I did some research into some more obscure commodities that were in the Defense National Stockpile. I was looking at some possible investments in land, which had fluorspar and beryl and a few other things. And I went on the U.S. Geologic Survey dated website and found that the government has been selling off all these different commodities out of our defense stockpile. So I was particularly interested in fluorspar, and I contacted the lady whose name was there who she was in charge of fluorspar. That's her job. And I said, how much of this is left? And she came back to me and said, well, we're selling off 10,000 tons of chemical-grade fluorspar and 40,000 tons of metallurgical-grade fluorspar this year. I said, no, my question is, how much is left in the stockpile? She said, I don't know. I'll have to go find out for you. So she got back to me about a week and a half later, and the numbers that she gave me were actually a little bit less than they said they were selling. I said, so you mean you're selling off what's left this year? But if you look back through the U.S. Geological Survey, you'll find that many different commodities, they sold out all their surplus 2 years ago or last year or this year. They're going to sell it out all next year. It's all being gradually gone down. They're selling off all of it. So eventually what happens if we get into a war and we need some of these commodities? Fluorspar, we import 70% of that from China. None of it we manufacture here, we mine here. And this is endemic across the entire economy.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. And yes, Christine.
Quick question. A place like South Africa is hurt economically, directly by this, okay, throughout its entire economy. Did you guys ever meet with Mbeki when you were down there? And what are the South Africans' reaction to
Well,
this whole
that's a very good question. I'd like to. I hope to go back and meet with him. The establishment is the establishment all over the world. I think a lot of us that have dealt with that know that. And I won't get into it further, but we've been talking to the different parties down there, and this new African piece really got a lot of attention down there. And I will go back to South Africa. I loved it there, great people. But I want to go to the top this time and go to him, and we're working on that right now.
You met the mining minister.
Yeah, I met the mining minister, and I met a bunch of politicians in the Reserve Bank.
What was his reaction, though?
The mining minister? Oh, that's a long story, because when then we went back again, the establishment people were like this a while back. It's even some of the gold companies down there, well, because it understands the bankers. I call the bankers, and my pet phrase for this are Hannibal Lecter for Goldman Sachs. These companies don't complain much or don't say much because they're the bankers. They need the money for project financing, so on and loans. That's the people they go to all the time. So they're stuck. This is what Reg Howe said in his suit. He said, listen, I'm not the primary person who should be here. It should be the gold companies. But Newmont Mining is scared to death. They met with me secretly, and then I sent the chairman an email. First, I've been on the internet about 4 years, only time it ever happened. They sent me the email back saying it was the wrong email address. Now, well, no, that can't happen. If you get through the email address, it just didn't happen. In other words, they're scared of dealing with this issue. For example, the government lands here. The same with the people down there. It's a very incestuous thing, but times are changing. The word's getting out. We thank you all for coming. It's going to be quite something, and they can't hold this thing down much longer. That's what I see. But thank you very much, and thanks, C-SPAN.